Yeah, Mark.
All right, great. All right, good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, like Mr. Kameen said, if you guys probably remember, you took the survey that Stephanie and I made a little more than a month ago, and we have spent pretty much the entire last month looking at the survey results that you guys gave us. And I'm not embarrassed to say I spent a long time looking at what it was that you guys, the responses that you gave were super interesting. And today we've only got about 40 minutes to do what it took us many, many hours to do. But I want to take you guys through a little bit of the process of what we did to kind of analyze the research that we were doing throughout the whole year when we came into Observe You. Isa, can I get the next slide? Thank you. So real quickly, I want to bring in a little bit of science to English class just to take you guys through the entire process of what we did, because this really was a research project for us. So we started out, this is just the scientific method, which you guys probably learned in like first or second grade, but we started out making observations. We were doing that pretty much the entire year. We then asked questions. And so, I'm going to pass out now, before we go any further, a paper that has the questions that we were asking. And so, as soon as you get this, I'm going to give about 3 minutes once everybody's got one. And I'd like you guys at the very top of the page to take a look at what our research questions were. And I want you guys to write down your hypothesis to this question. Step 3 in the process is to make a hypothesis after you figure out what the questions are. And it took us a little while to figure out what our questions were going to be. But they are now on this paper that you've got. And so from here on, take about 3 minutes, if you would, read the questions at the top of the page and just write down what you think the answers will be. You've been talking to a lot of your classmates, I'm sure, so you've probably got a pretty good idea of what the answers might be. At the end of class, we're going to look back and see whether your hypotheses are supported or not by the data that you're going to take. So take about 3 minutes, and then we'll come back to that. Also, feel free, if you have questions about my questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to help to answer. So basically, number 2, like, what do you think are the biggest difficulties? It's called festival. Cool, there we go. Think about 1 more minute. All right, anybody care to share out what one of their hypotheses is? We'll start with the first one. Did the project affect students' beliefs about making change in their communities? I'd love to hear like 1 or 2 hypotheses. Do you think after a year of trying to take action on some problem in the community, did that affect students' beliefs? What do you think? Yeah.
I said I'm pretty sure that it might have affected most of the people's projects and beliefs, but not all, because some people just really don't care for it.
Okay. Yeah, so there's some people that weren't as into it, it may not have affected their beliefs, but for the people who were like actively participating and passionate, that it may have changed their beliefs. Okay. Anybody else care to share for that one? Yeah. Sorry.
I say yes. Because I
Cool. All right, how about number 2? This one was probably the most interesting for me to look at all of the results, and you guys are going to look at some of the results also. So what do you think the biggest obstacles are towards taking action? Yeah.
Like finding an idea, like, or like a problem that needed to be solved in your community, or like how the community would either benefit from the idea.
Okay, so finding a problem and then figuring out how the community is going to benefit. And I think you'll see in the data that a lot of that will be supported. Yeah?
I think accepting that change will be the hardest thing about actually changing stuff and making change.
Sure, so identifying the problems you're saying might not be the difficulty, but actually doing something that will create change in such a really small amount of time could be a problem. Okay? Yeah?
Motivation.
Motivation, what about motivation?
Like getting students motivated to do their work, like the project in itself.
Okay, so just like getting the buy-in from students to actually be doing the work. Okay, cool. I want to move on in the interest of time. So what supports could Mr. Kameen include that would help students to be able to take action? So given what we just heard and maybe some other obstacles, what additional supports could Mr. Kameen put in place to make this project more successful? Yeah.
I said, like working and talking with like other people to see how they feel about their like project, and try to get some feedback on it.
Okay, yeah, so collaboration and feedback. Actually, the feedback part especially was my hypothesis, because in my observations, I didn't see a ton of individual feedback, and I thought that that might be an additional support that could be put in place. So I agree with you. Yeah, easy.
I was gonna say the same thing I think.
Okay, yeah, last one.
Using the motivation of the future to really impact the way you're doing the project.
Okay, so understanding that what you're doing now might not have such a big impact, but that if you start to gain those skills now, it's going to be better, or you'll be more likely to affect change in the future. I like that. All right, so we've done step 3, got our hypotheses. Next was conducting the experiment. You guys took part in the experiment almost exactly a month ago when most of you, if not all of you, filled out a survey. We got 96 student responses, which was just a ton. And it was a lot of information to go through, but we found some really cool information as a result. And the drawing conclusions, we're going to get to that today as well, in addition to reporting the results. All right, so we got the research questions already. You can actually skip that one. All right, so this is an example of what I did, and this process is called coding. It's a little bit different from like computer coding when you're making programs and things like that. So after you guys took the survey, we put it all in a giant Excel document. So we have all 96 responses for all of the questions in this document. And what I'm showing you here specifically is, you might remember the third maybe question that we wrote is, describe your topic in 1 to 2 sentences. So what we have here is just a little bit, maybe 15 or 20 responses that you guys gave for your project topics the way that you described them. And I was kind of amazed at just the variety of project topics that there were. But what we had to try to do, myself and Stephanie, who you saw a bunch of times also, we tried to put these project topics into different categories, which is very difficult, but we ended up coming up with about 12 different categories that we were able to fit in probably 95% of your project topics. So what you see on this side is the descriptions that you guys gave when you typed in the results. On this side, you have our categories. So the categories we came up with, a couple of them because they're pretty tough to read up top. There were some who chose animals, there was gang and gun violence, there was racism, implicit bias, and police brutality. It's kind of a big umbrella, but in order to get a category that fit a lot, we had to kind of make it a little broader. School curriculum and programs, cost of living, hunger, value of sports / exercise / obesity. So you see how these are kind of broad, but they all kind of go together as well. And that's the sort of process that I'm going to ask you guys to take part in today. Next slide. All right, so in just a moment, I'm going to pass out these envelopes. In these envelopes, there are 2 sets of student responses. So half of the class is going to see all the data. For one of the questions we gave was, what advice would you give to 7th graders? So half of the class is going to take a look at that data, and I just basically cut out all of the answers from the Excel document and put them on here. So what you're seeing here is exactly what you and your classmates wrote in the survey. So any like spelling mistakes or whatever, I just left it. So half of you are going to take a look at the advice for 7th graders, and half are going to take a look at the biggest obstacles that you perceived for this project. So with a partner, you're going to take a look and you're going to try to come up with categories. It is not an easy process. Stephanie and I spent hours trying to put this into categories. I'm asking you to do it in 10 minutes. So I'm not expecting that it's going to be perfect at all. And I'm also not expecting that you're going to get through all of them, but I did want to at least give you all of the data so that you could take a look at it. After 10 minutes, when you're going to be doing this with a partner, you're going to pair up with another group. When you get into those groups of 4, you're going to compare the categories that you came up with. And I'll give those directions again in a moment. What you're going to try to do is make it so that in that group of 4, you guys can agree on all of the categories that you came up with. Again, it's not easy. It's a longer process that we're just trying to kind of smush here in a very short period of time. Before I pass these out, are there questions about what I'm asking you? We'll get the next slide. All right, so on that note, if you guys could pair up just with somebody who is very close to you, this half of the room, you're going to take a look at the advice to 7th graders. Over here, you're going to take a look at the obstacles towards taking action. So once you have a partner, please raise your hand. I will give you guys an envelope, and as soon as you have that, you can get started. Okay.
Come on, Marie, wake up. Come on. There we go.
There you since there's a chair here,
Don't work with your friend and friend. You and I saw something like that.
Do your cousin turtles.
So, if you're on this side, I have,
How do we do the topics?
in the back also, can I have your attention? I just wanna, point something out to you. If you remember on this survey, Jacqueline, so real quick, on, what you'll see on some of these is, there's a bunch of different answers. You know, remember with this question, it's like a bunch of check boxes that you would check. And so what you have here, you might have like 3 or 4 different check boxes that are so what I want you to pay extra close attention to is at the very bottom of each one, if students have written in anything that I didn't put in, I want you to take a look at that. So for example, we didn't have enough time. That's the actually tried. Same thing with we didn't have an opportunity to act. We couldn't get around. So you're going to see a lot of those. I want you to pay extra close attention to those that consume those themselves and try to put those in work.
During summer.
No questions about that?
Plan during summer?
Oh, hey, we got it at the same time. Stay on task. Just straight up stay on task. Have a plan. What is your question?
So we came up with a bunch of plans. It was great. Like, I didn't know what the categories were.
Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore.
Not sure. So we didn't have an opportunity.
I don't exactly see why we're going to use stuff. Sorry, you're actually playing early. It seems you may have a lot. This is actually fair.
How do we do that?
It's not easy. So we're going to take a look at all of these different as many as you can, and try to see if there's any similarities between them. So, like for example, this one says plan to start early. I know that there's a lot of answers that had something about making sure that people start.
Yeah.
All of those.
Start early, don't we?
Exactly. So like these would go together, and then you would create the.
So start early.
So I'm seeing a bunch of people like lay them all out and then rearrange the ones that are kind of similar. That's a real good strategy, I think. We're looking at about 6 more minutes until we're going to move on. Similar,
Make sure.
I think that's okay. Cool. It's pretty important. One thing I heard you say. So I one thing I noticed is don't choose your things. There's a lot of people who said that, and there's a lot of people who said they should start. I might actually put those in separate categories because you're gonna do actually a lot of good job.
Make your projects. see advice.
Yes.
I was wondering take your start early.
You have an opportunity to get around.
Take good.
Wait, start planning.
My legal advice is system,
Okay, no, that's too much.
This is motivation. Make sure you enjoy your job.
Oh, don't give up.
You best be making up your mind.
Stay focused and do something that at least help out.
There you go, my boy. There you go. Here, rephrase that. Don't get that.
You need to make sure that you are passionate about the project.
Plan during summer.
Pick a topic that doesn't involve maximum.
I'm not sure if maybe there's I know that we probably are not super far along in this process. That's totally fine. Take another like 1 minute to try to name your categories. And there is, or the codes, whatever you want to call it. And on this paper, there is a space for you to write down the name of your category. So do that in the next minute, and then we're going to pair up and compare the categories with other people who are around you.
Okay, this is start early. Plan. Okay, this one's start early. Plan. This one's what you're passionate about your project. Your groups. And this one will be advice. Just work hard. That's oh no, I'll say this is motivation. It's like motivating you to pick something you want to do. Pick a topic that doesn't involve contact with anyone. Pick something good and do not waste time. Start early. Don't prosecute your action plan because you will end up not being able to do everything that you want to do. Make sure you use your time well.
We did it. Yes.
Well, it is, because those are just checks. You was at 88, like at the bottom of some of them.
I'm proud. Those were the, oh wow. No!
Pick a topic that doesn't involve to your
Alrighty, folks. At this point, if you can combine with a group that's near you, so ladies over here, if these two groups want to combine, we'll have these two groups together, these two, and these two groups. If you guys could combine, and we're only going to take about 3 minutes here to compare the categories that you created and see if there are similarities, and if there's any differences, try to figure out how you can bridge those differences to come up with the same category name.
Okay.
Are there questions before we get started?
See what we've done.
No, you'll
You better pick up the desk.
This is going to be real quick. I'm setting the timer for 3 minutes, and then we're going to move on.
Come on, guys. Okay, but look at me. Y'all can walk over.
pick a one.
Invitational no.
Sorry, sit up. Come on. You have to do this right.
Oh yeah, encouraging. Category.
Put it over here.
Management and organization.
Both these are
What is it? What is
So
it?
encouraging category, time management category, and organization.
You guys got a couple
Okay, we have
categories. You are close enough, you probably won't even read it.
Okay, guys.
your group, picking your
So what were they?
time-wise things.
So what you gonna say?
Motivation, time-wise, my bad. And
Yeah, there were a
a
couple.
topic that you're passionate about.
I came across.
So we only have one. So
How about what were you?
time management, what else?
smart.
Did you guys have motivation?
Okay, so I see a similarity.
Well, we had a
with this then, because you're talking about
We have
partners.
two.
I don't want to
See if you guys can come up with.
I'm gonna take a picture.
Because those are real similar.
Do you see
You
But
only have
part
to
of
have
the difficulty in searching is figuring out pretty much what
You kind of ruined this.
We have five.
you guys have 5. How many categories did you have? 3. See if
Two similar.
2 similars. All right. So try to see for those if you can come up with a name that's exactly the same.
Okay, your other topic, what was it? You had two, you were too similar, what was
Did
the
you guys end up figuring out titles you were doing?
organization? I had to plan ahead. So pretty much organizing your plans. Planning. So organizing what you're gonna do?
planning is essentially time management.
Well, we do have that the same.
In the next like 15 seconds, please wrap up your conversation.
It's just organization, so plan organization. Organize plan. Organize plan. Got that. What? All that. Imagine back to the
I don't know. I know what that was. It was right.
so like it was like
On the lap.
okay, we got our categories. We're fine. Stay up. Stay up.
Alrighty, can I get your eyes up here, your mouths closed? 3, 2, 1. Excellent. Thank you, thank you. So, I heard some good conversations. Guys in the corner, please. Thank you. I heard some good conversations between the groups, and I'm wondering, what were the categories that you guys ended up coming up with? So I want to start with the advice for 7th graders, which is this side. What were the categories that you guys came up with? Yeah, Isa.
So categories we got together.
Yeah.
Well, one of them was organizing the plan because he had organized and I had planning, and that's pretty much organizing what you're gonna plan.
Great. So yeah, it's a very good way to kind of bridge the gap between the two titles. Yep. Anything besides organizing and planning for the advice to 7th graders? Yeah.
We had, like, pick your groups,
Okay, pick your groups wisely. I came across that a ton when I was looking through it also. And I think one of the categories that I created was something about groups also. How about over here? I know there were a couple that were already given, but what were some of the additional categories that you guys came up with? Yeah.
We didn't have enough time.
Didn't have enough time. That was one of the ones, the check boxes that I gave to you guys. Yeah, Haley.
We came up with like they didn't have any help.
They didn't have enough help or support. That was another big one that I saw when I was coding the data. Yeah.
We said the plan development is like
Missing opportunities. Interesting. Okay, so the opportunities were there, but students didn't necessarily take advantage of them.
They weren't motivated.
Interesting. They weren't motivated. I think motivation was one of the ones that I came up with also. Yeah.
And some of these I really saw frequently like transportation.
That was another one that we had provided, right? That students aren't able to get around by themselves, and that was a real problem in trying to take action. Yeah.
There was one that was a lot. My biggest pile was start early, don't wait until the last minute.
Yeah, start early and don't wait till the last minute. So I want you to take a look, and I actually meant to bring this up earlier before we started. I'll make sure to do that next time. But which research questions, which of the questions that you wrote down your hypotheses to at the beginning, which of those questions helps you, which of those research questions does this data help you to answer? Because I didn't, for at least, well, the obstacles, it's pretty obvious, right? But especially for the advice, none of the research questions talked about, I wonder what advice they would give to the 7th graders this year. So which research questions are helped to be answered? Yeah.
I said number 2.
Okay. So number 2 is about the obstacles, right?
Yeah.
So of course I literally asked you what are the biggest obstacles. That's going to help me answer the question, what are the biggest obstacles? The advice, which of my research questions do you think I could have gotten answers to by reading your data from what advice you would give to 7th graders? And even if you didn't look at that question, I think you could still help me to answer that. Why did I ask you what advice you would give to 7th graders, and which research question does that help me to answer? Let's take a look at number 1. How did the project affect students' beliefs? In the advice that you guys saw, was that first question helped to answer? I would agree. There was not a whole lot in the advice column that that showed whether students' beliefs were affected. Did it talk anything about obstacles in the advice? When we're hearing advice like, get started early, make sure you stay motivated, does that help to answer any of the obstacles?
Yeah.
I would say a little bit. And so what I saw a lot when there's so much about start early, make sure you're motivated, to me, that says, well, you know what? One obstacle was there might not have been enough support. And like that's something that Mr. Kameen could fix pretty easily, to give more support in the beginning of the year. Which leads into question number 3, right? What supports and structures could be put into place? That one was definitely answered as well with the advice. One thing I want to point out, if you take a look up here, when I analyzed the data, and this I was analyzing the obstacles, that, and you guys saw this, some of the responses gave like 4 or 5 different answers. So you see the codes on the right side. Not enough time, no opportunity to act, can't get around, didn't develop a plan. Scheduling, not productive. A big one that I saw was students felt like they didn't have a voice or adults didn't take them seriously. And what you see there is I coded like a bunch of different colors. So there were some responses, like that very first one, got 4 different codes, which was a little bit challenging when I moved forward. So this right here tells you all of the categories that we created for obstacles and how many students answered each one. So you see, I don't know why this got cut off. For some reason, 39 students, that's close to half of you, said you didn't have enough time. But what was interesting to me is that in the advice, one of the biggest things I saw was start early, keep motivated. What does that tell me? If you're saying on one hand we didn't have enough time, and on the other hand you're advising students to make good use of their time, what does that say? Yeah? Okay, a lot of people didn't make great use of their time, and if they had made better use of their time, then they would have had enough time. Yeah?
I was gonna say that, there was something about, I read you said, they said it was not, like, having enough time to do it, like, they had almost like the whole year to do it, and it was, giving all these excuses instead of just doing it.
I mean, kind of. On one hand, like, what have you guys had, like 8, 9 months? Like, that seems like a lot of time, but to make really big change, you oftentimes need more than just a couple months. So I mean, I think it kind of goes both ways there. And again, that speaks to things that Mr. Kameen could do earlier in the year to make sure that, you know, by a month in, everybody knows what they're going to do. Cool. Can we get the next slide? Okay, just in the last couple minutes, I want to show you guys the graphs. If you remember the very last section, we gave a couple statements, and I asked you guys to rate from 1 being I strongly disagree to 5 being I strongly agree. There were 6 questions. Here's the first one. I felt supported by the adults who were involved in this project. What does this graph tell you about how students perceived their support? Did students feel supported? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a little bit of a larger percentage that said, no, not at all, I did not feel supported. But overall, that gets higher and higher to, at the end, we've got close to 60% of people saying that they agree. I think that number could be higher if Mr. Kameen changes a couple things, especially in the beginning of the year, to make sure that people are able to pick topics early on. Next slide. I was often confused by this project. And we have most people actually disagreeing with that, meaning that for the most part, things tended to be pretty clear. I was happy to see that. And honestly, I was a little surprised. Because when I came in and I saw a lot of research, but not a lot of like filling out assignments, I thought, I wonder if students actually know what they're supposed to be doing. So it was interesting to me that more than half disagreed with this statement. I enjoyed participating in the IB project, and what you see here is that it kind of evens off a little bit. There were more people who said, yes, it was almost half, but then there's almost half of people who either said, no, I didn't, or who were kind of in the middle and were neutral about it. I think my group worked well together. This was one that I was surprised that here we've got 2/3 of the students agreed. Yeah, my group worked well together. But then in the advice, what do we see about the groups?
Choose your group wisely.
Choose your groups wisely. So when I looked at that, I figured that meant a lot of people didn't choose their groups wisely. and they were suggesting to next year's students that they should choose their groups wisely. What I saw here is I might have misread that, and it looks like students actually did work well with their groups. Last slide. Oh, I'm sorry, not the last one. I received good feedback. Again, this one was sort of surprising. I expected these numbers to be more on the disagree, because I didn't see a whole lot of feedback. I wasn't here all the time, so I might have missed it. All right, next. Okay, this to me was by far the most interesting piece of data that I came across. That first question asked, did the IB project affect students' beliefs about making change? And what we see here are two very similar questions. The first one says, I think my project made real change. Second one says, this project made me feel like I could make positive changes. So when we look at this first one, I think I made real change. We had about a little less than 40% of students saying that they thought their project made actual change. But when we looked at this project made me feel like I could make positive change, we have almost, actually more than 70% agreeing this project made me feel like I could make change. What does that tell us about what students believe about this project? 50% said, yeah, it was 40%, said, yes, I made real change, but 70% said, I feel like I could make change. What's the difference there? What's the difference between these two questions? That only less than 40% said their project made real change, but 70% said this project made me feel like I could make change. There's a big difference there. Yeah, Mr. Kameen?
I think what it shows, what I really appreciate about this stat, is even if your project didn't do anything that you saw change the community, it did allow you to see the potential for you to change communities in the future. And so if we have 50% of people that said their project doesn't feel like it created change, half of them still learned that they could make change in the future. So if we have 3/4 of 8th graders saying that, oh, this project helped me envision change in the future, I think that's pretty cool. And that's a number that I want to increase. Both of those I want to increase next year.
Cool. So we have reached the end here. We've got just a couple more minutes, but at the bottom of your, At the bottom of your paper, I just want to know real quick, after looking at some of this data, were your hypotheses confirmed or were they rejected? So does this data support your hypothesis or not? And if you have enough time at the very bottom, if this data has helped you think about changes that Mr. Kameen could make, write down those changes at the very bottom, and I will give those. Thank you guys very much. If you could just leave your papers right here. Thank you for your participation.
Hey, Mr. Gordon, I didn't turn it off.
Oh,
I didn't want to mess with it.
Cool, thanks.
Is he doing this for every class?
Just for 2.
Okay.
You could cut it just when you say the